tonight, eh?
Milo, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Hey, Bruce.
Hello, is this Mr. Strang calling?
Yeah, I thought we were going to meet like at, you know what, let's decide right now from this point forward. We never do any recording before noon.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's usually about the time anybody starts functioning.
Yeah, exactly.
Somewhat moderately.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know why people get out of bed before noon.
It's convention. You know, you got to get up and take the 8:15 into the city.
That's right.
If your train's on time, you can get to work by 9.
All right, Bruce, is this the first podcast since the last podcast?
The first one we recorded, I believe, yes. The first one that's aired, who knows? Who
knows? But it seems to all be working now.
Oh,
I wouldn't say we had technical issues. I would say that it's more a case of we've been doing it so long, we're only semi-interested.
Well, that too. But let's blame this on the fact that Whereby has changed their interface and it's confusing us.
Yes, the interface has changed, and now we're confused. And I was talking to Bob Followfield yesterday.
Yes, how is Bob?
Bob is doing wonderfully well, and I interviewed him for about 15 minutes on the little portable, the AML portable studio.
Oh, the AML portable studio, excellent.
Yeah, and
it doesn't look like the portable cone of silence, does it?
No, but I would love that. That's what we need at the AML booth in Springfield.
The portable cone of silence. Oh, yeah. I'd pay money to see that.
I bet you could get somebody to make that.
Oh, I have no doubt.
I love the cone of silence.
Except for when they got it stuck on their heads.
Oh,
that episode.
I just love it. Chief, don't you think we need the cone of silence? Max.
Oh, Max.
So anyways, I was talking to Bob Followfield, and he was asking me if I was getting tired of doing the podcast, if it was becoming too much.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, not that I know of. Have you heard something?
Oh.
Am I being replaced?
Oh. I don't think there's an overthrow coming. At least that... No, the guys behind me say no.
All right. So, yeah.
They're all shaking their head like, no.
Yeah. I'm not tired of it yet. Because you know what? It's just recently I've realized this is no more than the movies, the movies, Burt Reynolds movies from the 70s and late 70s, early 80s. It's basically he was just shooting his home movies and putting them in the theater.
Right.
And that's really what we're doing. These are conversations we'd be having anyways.
No, some of their conversations you could be having over the internet, in a bar, having a drink with your buddy, in a restaurant, sitting down the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
That's right.
That's the beauty of it.
You could be at a steakhouse at a Courtyard Marriott.
You could be in the hobby shop hanging around with your buddies on a Saturday morning.
You could be in a hobby shop hanging around with your buddies on a Saturday morning. You know what you could be? You could be the creepy train guy on the New Jersey transit system.
Ooh. that's a possibility too. Train guy.
Yeah, train guy. All right. So you remember we started the 3-part 37 3-part how do I say the 37 part trilogy with Dave Abeles.
Yes.
I'm not sure he's pronouncing his name right. I think it's Abeles and I think it's Monet. I think it's Abeles. Okay. But we'll ask him.
We can ask him.
The first part, this is part 2 of the Dave Abeles 37-part trilogy. And we never even got talking to him about his trains.
Not
his
really,
model railroad last time because we got so wrapped up in the fact that he's works for New Jersey Transit, and he was telling us about his friend that's the scheduling guy for and his buddies are running the transit, New Jersey Transit.
And the scary part that anything he talked about when we were talking about towns in there is all related. Oh, that's on this line and that line. Like,
yeah,
it didn't matter what. He knew which line it was on and what the station was. And
Yeah.
I find that kind of fascinating and scary at the same time.
Exactly. All right, let's get him in here.
Get him in here.
Come on in, Dave. Don't bring the green shrimp with you. He's got his mic off, so we can't hear him. So
Dave's on mute, man.
Yeah, he's coming in very quietly.
Sneaking in.
Yeah, he's sneaking in. His microphone's still on mute. I think he's talking. I think right now he's probably talking up a storm, and we can't hear a word he's saying.
So do you want to throw out the crickets or the elevator music? We haven't had elevator music for a while,
Oh, now he's just gone altogether. He's left the building. Oh, and
we must have offended him.
And now he says we've gone away. I don't think so, Dave. I think we're here and you're not.
Well, he's back, but he's on mute.
Let's see it. Let's do it like this. You see? Can you hear me, Bruce?
Yes. No. No, I can't. No.
Yeah. So we're here.
We're here.
What has he done to it? Now he's been touching the buttons.
Don't touch the buttons.
It was working perfectly, and now he can't get it to work.
Maybe he can't find the mute button at the bottom.
And he says, his sound.
You know, you might have him. He may have hit the buttons on the this thingy part of his new headphone.
Yeah. Did you hit the buttons, Dave, on your...
Because that will kill your sound and also kill your microphone.
Yes, we gave him he has the newest issue of the AML, the official AML network microphone.
There he is.
There he is now. Let's ask him.
All right. Now, at first I thought I understood how to get into that door again, but it looks like I screwed it up a second time.
You sound great.
I just learned slow. But thank you. It's a beautiful headset this time. I'm so glad you guys got a third one for the studio here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the tin cans and string just weren't cutting it in.
Yeah, and having to share with you was like not that much fun.
No, you can share your piece, okay, but the microphone, unless you're in a band, that's which is a lot of fun. But it's tough to share a microphone. It's true.
Yeah, you wanted to talk about your music career too. We never even got to that.
That's true. Yeah, that's one of those things I think that pretty much has paralleled my interest in trains, actually. Ever since I was a young boy, before I remembered, I grew up in a family that did a lot of music. My mom was one of 8 brothers and sisters, and a couple of her brothers, I think we spoke briefly last time, were in a band called the Dean Brothers, up in central New York. And so we used to go up there all through the summer. A couple times a year, we'd go up to hear them play dock concerts and garage concerts and benefits for this cause or the other cause. But they sang a lot of harmony. They did some of their own music. They were on the local radio in Syracuse in the 1960s and 1970s. And so they have a good crowd that would come out to these things, and to watch these guys sing was really special. They could sing beautiful harmony like the Beatles or the Beach Boys, that kind of stuff. And so my mom also sang, and she would teach my brother and I how to sing in the car. And as time went on, listening to the music that was on the record player, I should say, in the living room of our home growing up down in New Jersey, I would learn to sing. And so my brother learned to sing, I learned to sing, and as time went on, we were encouraged to play instruments. And music is just it was always on in the background at home, and it's one of those things that's actually always on in the background of my mind. I'm always tapping a beat or whistling something. It's a constant presence in my life. And I did the trumpet growing up through middle school and high school. Played in the marching band at my mom's insistence in high school, and she had done so at the Skaneateles High School in upstate New York in the 1960s. And marching band, it sort of taught me a lesson in camaraderie. When you're in the marching band, you're not cool. We've never been cool. It's an important thing, but there's an ownership to it as well. I mean, you're part of something bigger than you that's depending on you to show up on time. It's depending on you to perform and give it your all every single time. And so that went on. I actually did that at Syracuse University too in my years there. So I played all through the marching band, which was fantastic, and enjoyed the singing on the side. And as we got into college, my brother and I had dabbled with guitar and drums and stuff in high school, and had a couple garage bands of our own, always looking up to my uncles, the Dean Brothers, and singing the same sort of harmonies. We'd write some of our own songs, but we do a lot of, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and a great band out of Minneapolis called the Jayhawks, sort of a alt country band, but great music. People like Crystal Gale and the Carpenters, and just that folky harmony based music. We loved it, and we started to perform at some of the local taverns through college, and that worked out great. And we ended up in a couple different bands over the course of my 20s and 30s. So, a lot of people took time off from the model railroading hobby in high school, chasing girls and cars, and I was not modeling as much in my 20s as I was out rail fanning and singing in a band called first it was called Gordian Knot, and then that broke up, and then we had a band called the Ridgewoods, and then we had a band called Strange River.
Slow down. It was called what?
We had a band called Gordian Knot.
Gordian Knot?
Gordian Knot in high school. Yeah.
Like it's Gordian Not You or Gordian Not Steve?
Gordian Knot it's a mythical, it's one of the fables. I forget whose fable, but in any case, it was a huge ball of rope that was tied up. And the myth goes that whoever untied it would have become the leader of the nation. I don't remember which nation it was. I didn't choose the name, as you can tell. And then somebody walked up and sliced it in half with a sword, and they said, "Okay, you're king." Would have been Alexander the Great or something like that. So that was the Gordian Knot, the knot that was not able to be untied.
Okay, so
it's not Gordy and it's Gordian.
Gordian Knot.
Oh,
like
Gordian Knot.
Gordian. It's not Gordian Knot.
Oh, I thought it was Gordian Knot, and I'm thinking Gordian Knot. Who
the hell's not?
You guys warned me not to push this mic 1/64th closer to my mouth, and I think that's what happened.
Yeah,
there it is.
That's we told you. He's using the new standard issue AML headset. So, Bruce, I Googled Dean brothers. Now, were they actually brothers, the Deans?
3 of them were, yeah. Bob Dean, John Dean, and Peter Dean were all brothers, and their good friend from Skaneateles High School in the same era was a guy named Holly Gregg, and they still play. They have they'll play a couple times a year.
I found them on Facebook.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
I sent you the link, Bruce.
Some of their music is just out of this world. I mean, they can really sing and blend, and harmony has been something that's been central to me my whole life. That musical harmony, people that can sing together.
Yeah, here they are as an old photo. One of the several attractions expected to help swell the coffers of the Skaneateles American Field Service Chapter. Friday, International Friendship Day. And that was the Gay Blades with John Dean and Peter Dean.
That was their first band, was called the Gay Blades, back when they were in middle school or high school. We're talking 1962, 1963.
Yeah, I bet you that wouldn't fly today.
It's funny. It's one of those things, right? I mean, how many things do you look at back in the day? I mean, just you look. I mean, no one wore a seatbelt. Even in the 80s, driving around in a car, I didn't wear a seatbelt.
Wow, so shame on you.
I know, it was fun. We got to ride the hump. Everybody argued over who got to stand up and ride the hump.
Oh, there you go.
Well, okay. So they have a Facebook page. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them on Google. So it's the Dean brothers,
right? And that's the name they sort of settled on after a bunch of names back and forth.
These were your brothers, or your mom's brothers.
My mom's brothers. Yeah, they were my uncles. And by my mom has passed on, as we talked about, but the rest of the family, one other brother passed away, but the Dean brothers, the original band, is still very much intact, and they can still sing.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. So then music was part of your. What did you play in the band?
I grew up playing trumpet. Started in 4th grade, right before I met my buddy Jack, and ended up playing just in the concert bands and stuff in grade school. But then once you got to high school, they had the marching band option, and I liked playing trumpet in grade school and stuff. It was fun, but I enjoy singing more. And in high school, when the marching band came around, though, again, that was a different level. There was an identity to that. And sort of a role that we played. You support the football team, you play in the stands, but you were just allowed to goof off and be silly as long as you did it in the context of this band. And I think there was an ownership of, my eccentric personality, I guess, my just the way I do things was it was a good fit for the West Morris Central High School marching band. So we had a lot of fun.
What was the name of the band?
Well, it was the West Morris Central High School marching band. So,
West Morris Central High School.
Yep. So it was a high school that basically served Washington Township and the town of Long Valley in Morris County, New Jersey, which is just north of where I live now. I'm about 12 miles from where I grew up.
So if it's just north of where, okay, so it's okay. All right. All right. So you did this and you played trumpet, and did you play trumpet in university as well?
Correct. Yep. And when I got to university, I stopped. I wasn't anymore in concert bands. Then I just did the marching band. But the amazing thing is, you go to university, and it was similar in high school, but especially when you go to college, I mean, you're really dropped into this bucket. And I came from a high school where I graduated with 296 kids, and it was which is fairly large for a New Jersey high school. Certainly not gigantic. But then you go into Syracuse, and Syracuse is a school with, at the time, it was about 3,000 kids in each class. So, you're going up by 100 or 10, I'd say the size of 10. It's a factor of 10. You get dropped into this bucket. And I didn't know anybody going to Syracuse. So marching band, you had to show up a week ahead of time, and they put you in a temporary dorm where it was just band kids. And all you did was practice all day long. We'd walk into the Carrier Dome at Syracuse. The football team was practicing at their practice field. So we had the Carrier Dome. And we were in there from 8 o'clock in the morning sharp until 6 p.m. sharp. And they served us lunch in the dome. And so immediately you're dropped into these guys, and it's almost like a training camp. So you're with the same people all the time for this week. So by the time the rest of the freshman class shows up to college, you've already got 50, 60 people that you know pretty well, at least for a week. So it was a real privilege to be able to get that done ahead of time and just hit it with a swagger. So, we hit the ground running almost, which really I thought was beneficial. But it was a great experience to play at Syracuse. I was there when Donovan McNabb was the quarterback for the football team. And so he was excellent, and the team was very good. And we traveled to bowl games. All 4 years of my college career, I got to travel to bowl games with the football team for free, which was a lot of fun. We went to Miami and Jacksonville, Florida, and Phoenix, Arizona one year. So pretty neat.
The Orange Bowl in Miami?
It was the Orange Bowl in Miami. That was the biggest one. That was my senior year. Yep. 1999, I think that would have been. 1998, the fall of 1998.
I think I remember seeing you in the band.
Oh, well, thank you. So it's a lot of fun, though. And so, again, I think the lesson there was, I lived with guys that were in the band. Even though I was in civil engineering school, they were doing liberal arts or business. I was closer to guys in the band than I was in my own major. So, it was a brotherhood of people that were in the marching band. And so that really taught me the value. I think that, a common interest can really hold you together. And again, until I got to meet Jack in fifth grade, I really didn't know anybody else that liked trains that was my age. And so these lessons came slow, but they came, and that was the important part.
And what was the lesson that came slow?
Well, that when you jump with 2 feet into something that you're interested in, especially as you get older and your community grows, it becomes a defining thing that can lead you to people that really have a lot to offer. And it's not just the subject area. These people become lifelong friends in other areas, that they become friends in every area. But they were led together by this common interest, but it goes way beyond that in a hurry. And that was an important thing to learn early on, because, this life moves pretty quickly.
Do you drink a lot of energy drinks, Dave?
A couple cups of coffee in the morning usually. I didn't need them until I started to work for the railroad, but now that working for the railroad, that's what everybody does.
You're a great guy to talk to. I'm really enjoying it, but I can't. Bruce, I can't keep up. Can you? Bruce is on mute.
I'm gonna have to listen to him when it's slowed down a bit. But it's
yeah. I think we're playing it.
I started thinking about those. But when he was talking about his days in various bands, is that our good friend Jim Scores from NCE was also associated with bands and stuff, and then he had the epiphany that I'm going to build a DCC unit, quit the band, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I think the DCC thing came quite a few years after the band, but it's... All right. Go ahead. By the way, let's get this business out of the way. I sent an email to your friend Rich how do you say it? Wisniewski?
Wisniewski.
I sent him an email saying Dave kept talking about you on the show, so you should be on the. You should come on and be a guest on the show. And he told me he was boring.
He says that, but he's a fascinating guy. Yeah, I think you guys have a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, well, and I said, well, that's perfect because I'm boring too, so it would work out perfect. Let me see if I can find. Let me see if I can find his reply, because it was actually quite cute. Like, he's like, oh, I don't think I'd be interesting, and I'm like, well, why don't you let me decide whether or not you'd be interested?
Yeah, I warned him about that, and he warned me about that about you guys too. I don't get to determine what's interesting.
No,
because it's not my podcast; it's your podcast, and you decide if it's interesting. So
yeah, exactly. When you tell us an interesting, I don't know, where's this email that I got from him? Let me see. There's that one. There's that one. There's that one. Well, it's here somewhere. I hope I didn't delete it, because it's really entertaining, and I'm gonna maybe I was so annoyed, I just deleted it. I don't think so though. There it is. Okay, so I said, hi Richard. After in-depth interviews with Dave Abeles, it seems only natural to interview his friend Rich, and he replies, he was honored, but I'm not interesting.
He is about as humble as they come, but he's a sharp guy. He's like an encyclopedia for railroad knowledge in New Jersey and in the Northeast. He's been watching trains his whole life, like I have as well, and he is an indispensable member of the crew here on the Onondaga Cutoff on my layout. Like,
yeah, he operates on 6 different layouts, so right there, that's interesting. But then he says in his next line, he says he's a normal guy, like as if he can determine that.
Yeah.
I think we'll be the.
Yeah, we'll be the judge of that.
Yeah, I think it's a bold statement. I've learned to not promise that to anybody anymore.
Yeah.
My thought is, if you're a train goober, chances are you're not quite normal.
I believe that is a fact right there, Bruce. Well said.
So Rich, by now I will have come after you, and we will have long since made arrangements, because he's convinced he's not interesting. I said, well, that's great. What is he said? So I'm sure I'm not interested. Just wanted to be honest that I'm not going to be a super entertaining interview. So then I'm going to reply, well, that's good, because this isn't a super entertaining show. Right. So you'd be perfect. All right, Dave. I got a feeling that if we don't, is there anything else you want to cover before we get to your model railroad? Because I got a bad feeling that once we get there, things are going to escalate in a hurry.
I would say it's we've tied everything else together at this point.
Yeah, and by now, of course, people have heard your elevator escalator reports at the end of some of the shows.
Well, that's one of my daily responsibilities on the big morning call at Transit every day. Yep.
Yeah. What was today's report?
Well, today we were looking a little bit better than the last time we talked. Today at Newark Penn, the track H number 14 is out for a step chain, which is the same problems we had last time. Number 15 was back in service, thankfully, because it's right next to it. Track 1, the elevator number 37 is back in service. Newark Penn, it has a escalator on tracks number 1 and 2. That's also out for a step chain replacement. At Elizabeth, they're still working on those doors that were vandalized. Cranford's still waiting for its midlife overhaul to be finished, which should be later this week, which is good. Plainfield was out, but it's back in service. And Broad Street Station on the old Lackawanna Railroad, that's also out, but will be back in service momentarily. The vendor is on site.
What's the biggest station on your, because you said 155 stations you oversee?
Yeah, I oversee 155. The largest by square foot would be Secaucus Transfer. The largest by passenger volume is probably Newark Penn. And
how much volume would that be?
Newark Penn sees about 90,000 NJ Transit customers a day, several thousand Amtrak customers a day, and tens of thousands of PATH, the Port Authority. They're another agency that runs the old Hudson and Manhattan subway train that goes to New York City. They see tens of thousands a day too. So it's a very, very busy 24-hour station.
What's the name of the station again?
Newark Penn.
Newark. And is that just exclusively New Jersey Transit?
It's on the Northeast Corridor. So the Amtrak actually owns the railroad, the catenary, the signals. NJ Transit owns the building. So it's a combination of NJ Transit and Amtrak on the mainline tracks. It also sees the Newark Light Rail, the trolley that comes down in downtown Newark, which is also NJ Transit, and the PATH, the Port Authority trains that go to the World Trade Center and to Hoboken, which are run by a separate agency called the Port Authority.
All right. We're going to have to teach this guy to talk a little slower. He thinks that I'm keeping up. That's cute. That's really cute. A lot of the trains go right into Penn Station, eh?
Yes, the vast majority of the NJ Transit trains and the Amtrak trains go to New York Penn Station.
And so they go through a tunnel under the Hudson River?
Correct.
And you said something about this little tunnel, or there's 2 little tunnels that get the trains in and out?
Yeah, I mean, these are tunnels that were built by the Pennsylvania Railroad, storied tunnels, really well documented, the history of it. And it was a cutting edge engineering project at the time. And it's when they built that beautiful New York Penn Station. It was all part of that same project that PRR had really financed and politicized and made sure that they got themselves a foothold in New York City. And so they built these 2 tunnels basically for one track in, one track out. But it was largely at that point, that was really for the long distance passenger trains, ones to Chicago or St. Louis or Harrisburg, Philadelphia, further out. It wasn't for commuter trains. Commuter trains came later. The Pennsylvania Railroad's commuter trains largely went to a different terminal called Exchange Place, which was a Hudson River waterfront like the other railroads in the area. And then commuters would change from train to ferry to cross the river on a ferry boat and go into town. This is 1800, 1890, 1900, 1910. And the history it's a fascinating one to read.
Oh, it would be. I mean, when you stop to think about it, how big and busy New York City was at the end of the 1800s, most people don't realize that.
It was a boisterous city even then, and it's incredible to really read about the history of the whole thing. I mean, in the 1700s, it was a farm. I mean, there was a bunch of farms in Manhattan. Manhattan Island was wooded with farms, and by 1900, it was completely developed, and they've just continued to go. It's got a lot of very strong stone as a foundation, and so they can build these unbelievably high towers, and that's why they have that iconic skyline. It's beautiful.
All right, so let's get to the matter at hand. Let's get to your model railroad, because you have a blogspot.com page. It's the Onondaga Cutoff. So it's ONONDAGA Cutoff, CUTOFF.blogspot.com. And how long have you been working on the blog?
I've had the blog, I would say, about 8 years.
Okay.
But I'd been taking pictures of layout construction since about 2009, and so I put together a couple entries dated earlier just to sort of track the progress of the early construction.
Okay, so explain to me how these blogs, like, is there an easy way to work them? Because it seems complicated to me, or not simple, or I don't understand it, or something. So, like, I scroll down. And I get it says 2019, then it says November, and then it says, so these are Rapido B36-7 coming in. There's 3 entries in November. Is that the idea?
Correct.
And then you click on whichever entry, and you scroll past a couple of pages that are your cover, and then you get to that particular story.
Right. That's exactly right.
And is there any ways to just kind of keep scrolling, and one story after another comes up, or do you always have to pick a story?
I think you can look at a certain date range. If you go over to the right and scroll down, there's a search function where you can search for different keywords, and there's also a list of all the dates and all the months that I've put the entries in there, so you can scroll through that whole list. But yeah, it's not as smooth. I wish there was a button on the front page that just said, every entry or date range, it was a little easier to sort. The whole blog idea started, it was actually a fellow that I met while I was out rail fanning watching trains at this little place called the Station Inn in Crescent, Pennsylvania. I think we had talked about that a little bit last time.
Right.
And Crescent there's always, the cool part about the Station Inn is that it's owned by a rail fan, and it's run for rail fans. So almost everyone that goes there is someone you can talk to about trains. And as Bruce said, that means you meet some really interesting characters. It also means, though, that there's a lot of really fascinating people that you can talk to. And one of the fellows there, is a fellow named Al Werner. He introduced me to another fellow that he was traveling with. And this guy had a blog. And here's this guy that's 70, 72 years old at the time that's got a blog. And me, at 32, I was like, I don't have a blog. He's like, oh, you should start one. It'd be nice to see your work. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I not have a blog if this guy's got a blog? This can't be this difficult. So turns out it wasn't too difficult to set up. And when I Googled it, it came up as Blogspot because that's one of Google's products. And it lets you fairly simply with a template. You can select your template you want, and you can put together a blog with pictures and stuff pretty simply. And that's how I got started on blogspot.com.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, there's a lot of information here. I'm not figuring out how to work it, so maybe we'll figure that out another day. I'm not that swift. Bruce can probably figure it out.
Yeah, if you want to scroll, if you go to the right side of the page and you scroll down, you'll just see a whole bunch. You'll see it by date. It's by year.
Yeah.
If you click on the year, you get the months.
Yeah.
And then you can click on the month and you see the entries. And so one of the things I love about it is that you can go back to, say, 2015 and click on December 2015.
Right.
And you can see, you click on it and you can see what I was doing, exactly 4 years ago.
Right.
Exactly 5 years ago. And it's funny because it's a quick way to compare pictures.
Yeah,
and
that's
stories, which is pretty neat.
I mean, I guess here's why I'm annoyed. This is a better explanation. Bruce, are you still alive? He's on mute. He's left. He's just gone. He's gone to the washroom. Bruce, where are you? All right, I'll go ahead anyways. Here's why I'm annoyed with your blog, because it seems like there's a lot of really, really good stuff on it, and I'm not sure what the easy way is to find it, because I'm just kind of scrolling through here, and it's just like, it seems like one really interesting story after another, like the one that we went to, what did you say, December 2015, and the article is about modeling a Conrail C30-7A, and it's a really, really good article and really well worth reading. So I'm kind of wondering, I'd really like to be able to just kind of scroll through a list of the title. I don't know. It's just, but boy, this stuff is really top quality stuff.
A list of, I'll have to take a look. I might be able to squeeze that in. I haven't really thought about that, and I appreciate the advice, because you're right. I mean, you don't know who cares what I did on what date? You want to know what I did.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point. I'll take a look at that. I appreciate it.
I got a message from Bruce. Has he been locked out? Oh, he lost his internet, so it's just you and me, Dave.
Oh, boy. Well, okay.
That's just this. We can handle it. You and I can do it. I know we can. Okay, so, I'm gonna go. Let's start with. When did you start building your land? Why is it called the Onondaga? How do you say it?
Onondaga Cutoff.
Onondaga Cutoff. And what is that exact? It's Conrail. So is that an actual place? Is it a?
So it's a fictional bypass that in my alternate history, basically the New York Central built bypasses around a bunch of downtowns in the 1920s, 1930s as traffic grew. They built bypasses around Rochester. They built bypasses around Albany, New York. They did grade separation projects in New York City and out in the Midwest. And so I grew up going up to Central New York to see the family, to see the Dean brothers play. My parents, I'd beg them, they'd drop me off next to the tracks with my buddies or with Jack or my cousins, and we'd my brother, we'd watch the trains come by, and it was a real main line, big double track, double stack trains, auto rack trains. And at the time in New Jersey, we didn't have double stack trains on the Lehigh line by my house. We didn't have auto rack trains. We didn't have Amtrak service unless you went to different parts of the state. So Central New York was really, it was very impressive. It was almost magical. I loved it going up there. And part of it was the magic of sitting trackside on the former New York Central water level route, which is, the Conrail called it the Chicago line.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because this is the route that runs along I-90, is it?
Correct. Yep. Between Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Albany, all the way across Central New York.
Yeah, because, whenever I drive to Springfield or down that way, That's the route I see. And I mean, it looks like, so it used to be really, really busy. And is it still busy or?
It's still busy. I mean, it's still CSX's primary route from Chicago to Albany and then the New York metropolitan area. Yes. But PSR, the modern U.S. railroad craze, the Hunter Harrison thing, where they've basically made longer trains and turned away a bunch of lower profit traffic to raise the stock price and what have you. That has taken some of the volume off the Chicago line for sure, like it has all the big railroads.
What is PSR?
Precision scheduled railroading.
Ah, okay. Yeah, we try to avoid acronyms as much as we can.
I think that's a good idea for people that aren't necessarily familiar with them for sure. So
and the problem, the thing of it is this is listened to by people of a wide variety of skills.
Yeah, so you've done well over 160 of these interviews from what I've looked at online. How many interviews have you done total?
Well, we do. You'll be like number 141 or something.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And that's individual interviews, and then we constantly talk to people a little bit. So I'd say we probably interviewed around 150 people in one way or another.
That's fascinating. It's an interesting cross section of the hobby for sure.
Well, but it's who's listening, right? Because we have, I would say, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 what I would call regular listeners. So, you're going to get a whole range of people, from people that barely understand anything to people that are like you guys, that have built a huge layout and have, been deeply involved in railroading forever. So it's just important that we kind of, keep it as simple as we can while we're doing it, because it's interesting stuff. Like when we're talking about this it's interesting to me because I've driven that route across I-90, 100 times probably in my life. And I don't know much about that particular line, but I see it all the time,
Sure. And I think, being again, like a teenage kid, wide-eyed and excited about a lot of different things, and coming up to see my uncle sing in a band, see my cousins whom I loved, and with my brother and my family, we would listen to music in the car, like we were talking about. So there was a magic to these trips to Central New York for me. It was the smells of Grandma Dean's house, my mom's mom, the going swimming in Skaneateles Lake, which was so clean that you could drink the water right out of the lake and you wouldn't get sick. The restaurants and the waterfalls and the canyons you can hike in, it was just magic for a young kid to have that experience. And so as we went up and did that, and then I would beg to go watch the trains. So that railroad took on a almost mythical quality to me. I mean, that was what mainline railroading should be like. In my mind, that was the main line that all others would be judged by. And right down to the signals and the New York Central details, like the names on the bridge or the concrete, the tombstone mile markers that they would have, the miles from Grand Central Terminal in New York City. And growing up near New York City, it was relevant too. I mean, of course, I was familiar with New York and how important that was down from my region. So this railroad fed off that energy as well. It was something that really linked a lot of things together in my mind.
Right.
And so that was the origin of the idea. So, when I finally bought the house out here, after I started working for NJ Transit, was able to afford a place. My college buddies all got married and moved off. And so I was left with either renting by myself or buying a house. And, we talked about how my sister had passed away last time, and she had a life insurance policy. And my dad said, look, I don't need the money. So you and Ben, my brother, you guys each take half of the life insurance policy, which is about $45,000 or $50,000 at the time. And Ben and I both looked at each other and we said, well, that sounds like a down payment on a house. So right. He bought a house with his wife at the time. And I bought a house by myself. I hadn't met anybody at that point. And that's the house I'm living in, that I'm sitting in the basement right now talking to you guys.
Right.
Well, before I came over and went through the door and locked myself out again.
And and was it before or after you bought the house that you became creepy train guy?
It was after I bought the house. The house may or may not have had a direct effect on Creepy Train Guy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I got a question for you, and I think Bruce is going to love this question. Are you with us now, Bruce?
I am. I'm back.
I appreciate that. Now, don't leave, Bruce, because I always miss you when you leave.
Well, I'm not sure what happened. All of a sudden you were there, and then There was nothing.
All right, I'm not going to lie. I unplugged your laptop.
Oh, okay.
So skinny. You say it so fast, and I can't say it at all.
Skinny Abeles.
Skinny. Yeah, that's not how Dave says.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you look at it how it's spelled, it's not.
No, it's one of the. So that whole region was part of the Iroquois Native American tribes, and they had a whole democracy and a nation unto themselves there for a long time. And so Onondaga,
Skinny Atlas.
Skinny Atlas is how the locals say it. Yep, Skinny Atlas.
All right, and it's part of the Finger Lakes. Lake Skinny Atlas is part of the Finger Lakes.
Correct.
Which is very famous in upstate New York because it's a series of 5 lakes that are long and narrow. And however, Canandaigua, how do you say it, Bruce? Canandaigua?
That's correct.
Okay. John Armstrong was born and raised, and he is a very famous model railroader in Canandaigua Southern. And were you familiar with that at all?
Only through the pages of Model Railroader. We read about John Armstrong, but and some of the other early modelers too. At the time there was, that was the mid '80s by the time I really became cognizant of Model Railroader and the larger world of it. But it was funny. I had no idea that he was from Central New York. I knew his name.
Okay.
And Tony Custer would write an article, and Tony Custer was the editor at the time of Railroad Model Craftsman. I had no idea that was produced in New Jersey. No idea he lived in New Jersey. It was an interesting time without a means to know these guys up close and personal. They might as well have lived in Australia or California.
Sure.
And there was so Jack and I were the only kids, and my buddy Mark that we talked about last time. The 3 of us were the only kids our age we knew that could even care a hoot about trains.
Yeah. Okay, but okay. So, all right. So, what is the Onondaga Cutoff? And did it actually exist? Is that what I got from your explanation, or is it?
No, it's a fictional bypass. So it's based off the prototype idea of bypassing a downtown. I wanted to make it as plausible as possible. I would love to have modeled the real Chicago line. And actually, my original plan was to model the Conrail Lehigh line, which is the New Jersey Railroad, the former Lehigh Valley across New Jersey. But it's a single track railroad with passing sidings. And to me, with a model train sitting at a passing siding with a stop signal is less interesting than it is on the prototype. And so the idea of a high density trunk line was more appealing for me for modeling mainline traffic. But then when I try and lay out DeWitt Yard or the prototype that you're familiar with along I-90, you try and lay that out in a basement, and even though my basement's not tiny, it's about 28 by 34.
Okay.
But you try and put in even a semblance of DeWitt Yard or Syracuse, and you can't do it. There's just no way to include enough to have a functional operation. And so the light sort of went off in my brain. I said, boy, like Lackawanna built a cutoff, New York Central built cutoffs. Maybe I can come up with a fictional cutoff that would capture the flavor of the Chicago line in Central New York, but it would do it in a way that I could make it plausible and fit it in my basement. And I wouldn't have anybody saying, well, that curve is in the wrong direction, or, that bridge is really on a different angle. We all have to make compromises when you're building a layout. So this, to me, allowed me the greatest degree of creative freedom while still maintaining the focus on the operation and coming up with a layout geometry that was conducive to efficient operations.
Okay, so it's a freelance railroad with a prototype. What's
proto-freelance? Is that what you're looking for?
It's exactly it. It's a proto-freelance layout. That's how I describe it. If someone says, "Well, do you prototype model or do you freelance?" I say, "Well, you proto-freelance. It's a prototype railroad. It's a prototype operation, but it's on a route that is freelanced."
All right. So let me ask you this question, because you're not I get the sense that you're fairly. I don't know what the word would be that I'd want to use. You're somebody that is, I'm not sure you've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, you're right. There isn't a word there that's not a direct insult. You got to be careful.
Yeah, because like, okay, a lot of guys are absolutely, you got to. I'm modeling. I model the Chicago Northwestern between here and here, and this is what I model. There's this section of the railroad, and they're not interested. So a lot of them aren't interested in somebody that's not doing it as close to the prototype as possible, and yet you're kind of halfway in between. So how do you have people that are kind of like rolling their eyes because you're not, it's a fictional Conrail line, or?
Well, I have more people that roll their eyes because it's a Conrail line than the fact that it's fictional. Most of the guys that are a generation older than me hated Conrail because Conrail came in and cut the guts out of their beloved, fallen flags. Conrail came about in the late 70s, mid 70s in New Jersey and in the whole northeastern United States. And it came in to save an industry that was falling apart at the seams.
Yeah.
Fantastic book called The Men Who Loved Trains by a fellow named Rush Loving Jr.
Right.
Is an unbelievable story of how Conrail came to be, how it got split up between CSX and NS, and all the players that were involved. Really, just a fascinating book. It's definitely worth a read.
Well, Conrail's a great railroad to model because it had so much variety within its motive power and rolling stock and the whole 9 yards. And I mean, yeah, I think it's a great prototype to choose. You do just about anything with it.
I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, when you look at the 1990s, Conrail had more variety than almost any other Class 1 railroad in the country.
Yeah. And where did Conrail run from and to, basically?
Conrail, if you want to look at the majority of their traffic, they were a giant X. They went from Chicago to the Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. area, and upstate New York and Boston, Albany, down to St. Louis.
Okay. So
and it crossed out in Ohio. And they did it with several different core main lines. And of course, when they were created in 1976, there was 7 different main lines, and they had to pick and choose how they wanted to do it. So they really cut the guts out of a lot of what they had to do because they couldn't make money with all these parallel routes. And so they cut back in a major way, and they kept the New York Central through Syracuse, which is what I model. And they kept the line across central Pennsylvania, and that's the one that goes through Crescent. That's the former Pennsylvania Railroad. They kept a couple other ones that were almost sort of a secondary mainline status, but those are the 2 major east-west trunk lines. And that was where you really got the feel of what Conrail was doing. Moving that traffic from the New York metropolitan area, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and going all the way to Chicago with it and taking it to the West Coast connections.
All right. So how did you decide to model Conrail? Like at what point did that come about?
Well, it really came to crystal clear in my eyes when we were operating trains at Babby's, and that was a big O gauge layout with multiple main lines. There's always something going on, something moving, and it was exciting. People enjoyed coming to see it. People would bring their kids and they'd watch us run trains on it. So
wait a minute. Time out. You never told us that in part 1 of the 37-part trilogy.
You guys we told you about Babby's.
I told you about Babby and how your father broke up with her at somebody's wedding.
Yeah,
right.
But we didn't hear all we didn't know that you were running a going concern there. Just that with you and your buddy running trains.
Yeah, and the part that caught me was he said people would bring their kids and watch us run trains. Like, yeah. You can't pass over that like as if it's not important.
Well, I mean, it was
take a breath, Dave. Get a drink. I'm talking for a minute,
and not Red Bull.
Yeah, yeah, not Red Bull.
Right, I'll grab myself a breakfast stout. One second.
Don't get a coffee. Don't go anywhere. Well, he's actually leaving.
You're leaving to get a drink.
Well, I didn't mean to leave.
Well, no, I took a drink.
Oh, there he is.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I got it splash of water on my face. So I got to take a cold shower.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do that. Okay, so if for some reason or other somebody's fallen into the podcast between part 1 and 2, Babby, unfortunately, Dave's mother passed away at a young age, And so then his father was a widow, and eventually he met Babby, who was became his girlfriend, our main female companion. And she had on the very first date, Dave's dad says, "You got to come over here." And Dave's going, "Well, no, it's your first date. I'm not coming over to her house." And he says, "Yeah, you got to come over here." And it turned out her late husband had an entire 3-rail model railroad in the basement. Now, how big would that have been, Dave?
It was gigantic. It was the biggest home layout I'd seen to date. This is about 1999, maybe 2000 when we sort of discovered it. It had to be 25 by 60.
Wow.
I mean, it's mammoth. It had 2 separate tables. One was sort of built around a control station in the middle that had 4 ZW transformers. The other table was added on later. That was a separate loop of track, and we actually added further onto it because Babby said, "Oh yeah, make it run. That'll be great." So, Jack unpacked all of his trains, and we started to go there all the time and rebuilt the layout and got it running again. But it became a fixture. We were there so much that Babby's friends said, "Oh, we'd love to come see it run." So Babby once a year would have a supper for everybody, and then we turned the trains on. And friends and family would come, and there'd be 25 or 30 people with their kids, and they'd come down and they'd watch this Lionel train. And Jack had a whole operation for it. This is before Jack was in operations planning, but his brain is just built that way. And so he had a certain number of minutes that trains would run time in a loop on this main line. And after that number of minutes, then it would arrive at a certain point on the main line, and it could use those switches. And then it would run a certain number more minutes. And then when it got to the second part, so you basically had trains that would run time. And in the meantime, you could do other things like classify cars or switch industries. So in effect, with 2 people, you could have a pretty complicated operating session. And it was a hoot. We had a lot of fun down there. I learned a lot about operation there. So that's seeing that the density of that operation and the fact that we could turn the lights off. And of course, 3-rail, everything has lights, everything's got sound. The buildings are all lit up. So it's I'd never seen anything like that in HO scale. So it really like put an impression on me. I said, boy, like when I build a model railroad someday, I want it to be exciting, a trunk line level of activity. And I want it to be able to run at night because if railroads run during the night, why shouldn't my model railroad? So that concept has ended up being a lot more, people are more interested in the night running here than I thought they would be. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But that's how I landed my first article on the cover of Model Railroader, was because we run trains at night.
Right. Okay. Well, let's not get to that part yet. So we're still trying to determine why it was that you decided to model the Conrail.
Well, Conrail had these trunk lines again. So you see the confluence. I'm at Babby's. It's a trunk line. Going to Central New York. It's a magical trip every time. I love it. It's a trunk line. And the light bulb went off that I said, boy, if I modeled Conrail not at my hometown or my home state, but if I did it at this spot that we go to on vacation that's so exciting, and if we capture that density, that energy on a double track main line, CTC with the signals that work, I can dim the lights up and down, I can capture that 24-hour experience, boy, that would be exciting. And, on top of that, my favorite railroad's the Denver and Rio Grande Western. Well, how do you model the Rio Grande if you want to model trunk line density? Well, Chicago line had run-throughs all the time. And there's all sorts of photographs of Rio Grande power on the Chicago line.
Okay.
So SP and Rio Grande had merged in 1987, I believe, 88, when Phil Anschutz had owned the Rio Grande, bought the Southern Pacific, which was bankrupt, and then kept the SP name. And so where SP engines ran through, which they ran through on Conrail daily on the Chicago line, and now the Rio Grande engines would show up too. So certain trains would you'd look for them because they'd have run through power, TV5, 5.6, TV79, SLSE, some of the different train symbols that would have the run through power. So Chicago line really, it checked all the boxes for the goals that I had as a modeler, because my original goal for modeling was building, and then Jack changed it, and then my goal became operations. I became enthralled with this idea of model railroad operations. And
okay, so between after Jack, what was the first railroad what was the first true HO scale, or scale, not HO, but scale model railroad that you operated on?
Ooh, the first true operation. It was here. It was the Onondaga Cutoff.
Okay.
Because we had our first. In fact, I've got a photograph that hangs on the wall here. My first operating session on the Onondaga Cutoff was October 25th, 2011.
On my son's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday to your son.
Yeah. So you did that. Okay. So, all right. But I think that's a pretty big leap, don't you, Bruce? Like from going from operating a giant 3-rail layout, to operating a scale railroad in the fashion that one-to-one railroads ran. Like, what is it you used to teach yourself to get your model railroad to the kind of operations you wanted it to be?
Well, it was trial by fire. We learned by doing and making mistakes and then changing as we moved along. And it helped that by 2011, Jack was working in rail service planning at NJ Transit. I was
That's the rail service planning at NJ Transit. So he was helping. He was part of the department that planned the actual train times at the New Jersey Transit.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And I was working in infrastructure engineering with the bridge department, doing bridge inspections like we talked about last time.
Right.
And it was a good pairing, not only from a friendship basis, but also from an experience basis. And so I knew roughly what the Chicago line looked like in the 90s. And you could Google, pictures from Railroad Picture Archives or from railpix.net. There's a great website called the CR Cyclopedia, the Conrail Cyclopedia, a couple different websites that we would learn from. One of our favorite was called multimodalways.org.
All right.
And
so by 2011, you're 34 years old.
Correct.
And you've been doing model railroading with Jack. Like, by this point, had you been exposed to other model railroading?
Only through the pages of magazines and a couple distant stories of. And sounds like the cat got in.
Yes.
I love cats. That's awesome. That's spectacular.
In my next life, my studio is going to be at the bottom of a 32-foot missile silo.
Yes. with secure doors on it.
Yeah. All right. So where were we? Magazines.
Right.
Like I had time out here. Bruce, don't you find this? Do you understand where I'm going with this? Because he has a model railroad now that's very well respected.
Yes.
And by 2011, he still hasn't made a connection with this the population of model railroading in general. Like, he seems to have managed to do this all on his own.
Now it's funny because I love this camaraderie. I love being part of a community. It's central to just my personality. I found it in the marching band. I found it playing rock and roll bands, with Gordy and Knott, and then The Strange River, which was the later incarnation of that. I loved it. And here the silliest thing is that here I am building a basement size layout, 25 miles from Tony Custer, 30 miles from Ted Pamperin, and 25 miles from David Olson. Down the street, 10 minutes away, Jerry Diedzik. These are legendary model railroad guys that have been central to the whole development of the hobby. And I didn't even know they lived in New Jersey. I didn't have any concept of what was right under my nose. You can't make it up.
I know. Like, and it seems like you've so did you have some sort of did you just devour books on construction? Or because 2011 the internet was alive, so you were probably doing some research on the internet. Like, how did one morning you woke up bolt upright out of bed and went, okay, today's the day I'm going to start building a 25 by 36 foot layout?
Well, I bought the house with the basement that I knew could fit the railroad. And I had great friends that were, that shared my enthusiasm for construction. So one of them, a fellow named Rick Smirnoff, who I'm not in touch with as much anymore since we've had kids, but one way or the other, he loved trains like I did. I met him watching trains in Bound Brook, New Jersey, through a different friend. And Rick was very good with his hands. He was a guy that did HVAC work professionally and some decent carpentry work, some decent masonry work. And so I said, Rick, I don't know. I don't even know where to start. He's like, well, I'll come over and help you out. So he taught me how to frame the walls out in an old basement. Taught me how to true lumber. Had another friend whose grandfather was a carpenter, Tim, who was part of Strange River, part of the band. And Tim's grandfather is a carpenter. Said, well, this is how you site. I asked him, I said, how do you site lumber? I need to buy lumber. He says, well, let's go. We'll go to the lumber store. So he taught me how to look down a piece of lumber. Another fellow taught me how to use power tools. And meanwhile,
were any of these guys model railroaders?
All of them were loosely interested, and Rick eventually built a model railroad for himself. And Tim, he would enjoy it vicariously through me and my brother. But no, they were people that were drawn. I asked them to jump in with me so that I could learn how to get started on this whole thing, because I was never going to get it done myself. I didn't know how to do this stuff.
So you said that the basement of this house, you knew your plan would fit in there. So did you have a plan already drawn out before you bought the house?
I had some sketches, but as soon as I bought the house in 2004. And so immediately once I had the basement, I got Jack. I drew out on the CAD software. I drew out a scale model of the basement and said, hey, Jack, let's think about what we can fit down here. So Jack's the kind of guy, you give him an idea or a framework and you let him chomp away at it. And 3.5 years later, he says, I think you need to turn it backwards and upside down. And you say, well, why, Jack? And he says, because if you did it this way, you get 3 times the number of trains and you don't have any duck unders. And you look at it, you say, I'll be jiggered. You're right. And so I took his advice on the design. So while he's thinking about the design, Rick is teaching me how to frame the basement out. And while Rick is teaching me how to frame the basement out, he says, well, do you know how to solder? I said, no, a little bit. He's like, no, I'm talking about pipes. This boiler sucks. This boiler needs to be replaced. This boiler is a mess. It's going to fail. I said, okay. And so he put me in touch with people. Then we replaced the boiler. I learned how to solder pipes and how to do that. Another mason friend of mine, I paid him because he was professional at the time, but he said, yeah, I can repoint your foundation. So I worked alongside him. He taught me how to repoint stone foundations. So I sort of learned a lot in the process. But yeah, the model railroading part of this, the vision was on operating model railroad, but I did whatever I could to get there. I took help from experts in all different parts of life to be able to get to the point where I could build a model railroad. So one of my slogans down here is let the experts be the experts.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I very rarely dispatch my railroad, or yard master. Jack has a brain for dispatching. He loves it. A fellow named Chris Lee from Long Island. He's another guy that I met through the model railroad community later. He's a great dispatcher. So they dispatch it. Rick he's the train or not Rick, I should say. Rich Wisniewski is the train master. So he handles the crewing issues and the cadence of trains and helps coordinate the power movements to replicate that the trunk line atmosphere. But I think it's funny. You talked a little bit earlier about Rich Wisniewski. That's the guy. So he worked at NJ. He works at NJ Transit with Jack and I.
Right. And he's not very interesting.
That's what we've heard. And I have to say I beg to differ. But Rich, so Jack and I are working at Transit. At this time, you didn't really talk on the railroad that you loved trains. It was something you kept to yourself. Maybe you put a picture or two up in your office, but it was small and inconspicuous. You wanted to make very sure that people trusted you to be professional, and so you didn't talk about the hobby much. Right. So, but we had this operating session in October 2012 or 2011, and it was a hoot. Mark, Jack, myself. A buddy of mine named Nick Anchant that I had met taking pictures of the Lehigh line. He went to school at Lehigh University. He's considerably younger than me. He's probably 10, 15 years younger than I. Just a gentleman, a nice kid and brilliant. He was at school. He loved model railroad signaling. And I met him taking pictures, but he's like, oh, do you like, you're going to do models? I said, yeah. He says, you can have signals. I said, absolutely. He says, well, I'd like to help. I'm helping build the Lehigh and Keystone Valley Model Railroad Club signal system in Bethlehem. Right. I said, oh, perfect. So there's another subject expert that I was able to bring in. But outside of these guys, we were having trouble running the railroad. We didn't have enough people. So one day Jack says, every time I go upstairs and I see Rich Wisniewski, who works up in planning, this is before Rich came down to the railroad. Rich has got a scanner on. He's listening to train stuff over in Oak Island Yard outside our office. He's got some train pictures, like Erie Lackawanna stuff. I bet you he'd like to come see your layout. And I'm like, Jack, I don't know, man. Like,
right.
Like we drink a lot of beer. And I don't think Rich drinks much beer. We might freak him out. It might be a little too much. And Jack's like, yeah, that's true. And we hemmed and hawed on it. But then I said, you know what? What the heck? You got to take a chance. So him and another fellow that we'd seen training pictures on his wall, a guy named Al Tillotson, I approached them and said, hey, we're going to do an operating session on my model railroad. It's not much to look at this point. It's plywood and some track and switches and stuff. But I model Conrail in 94. I'd love to have you guys come down for an operating session. And so they came. So Rich writes me an email that I still have a couple days later. He says, Dave, thank you for the hospitality. We really had a lot of fun running trains with you and Jack on your railroad. Whole list of ideas of things you can change to improve, or maybe you should think about this. But you're onto something great. Keep doing what you're doing. None of this is criticism. It's meant to be complimentary. Rich was very humble about it.
Right.
And he says, and I think there's a few people that might enjoy seeing what you're doing. I'm like, great, more operators, fantastic. So Rich comes down a couple weeks later and says, one of my friends, he actually lives out by you. His name's Jerry Diedzik. And I said, Jerry Diedzik from Pattenburg, New Jersey. And Rich says, yeah. I said, his daughter, Jenna, graduated high school with Jack and I. And his younger son, who's a little bit younger than that, graduated with my brother, Ben, from high school. And we knew that Jerry liked model trains, but the paths never crossed. I didn't know Jenna well enough to ask her about it. It's a fairly large high school class. And so it just never happened. And so here we are, 15 years after high school, and Rich puts me in touch with Jerry, who comes to an operating session.
So let's just spell Jerry's name, because I know people are going to want to look that name up and see some people aren't going to know, so they're going to want to see who you're talking about. So how do you spell his last name? I'm
going to take a quick little walk across the studio here.
Okay.
And I will pick up a copy of Model Railroader magazine. You spell Jerry's name, and it's just Jerry.
Right.
But his last name is Diedzik. It's a Polish last name. And his Z is in Zachary. I-E. D is in David. Z is in Zachary. I-C is in cat.
Now, how would you ever pronounce that name? Diedzik.
Diedzik.
Yeah. Good luck with it.
And if you're Polish, it makes perfect sense.
Well,
to the rest of us.
Yeah. It's just like it looks, man.
Yeah. Just like it looks.
So lo and behold, though, Jerry, at the time he wasn't writing for Model Railroader. He'd written a couple articles and such, but he came and he had a blast, and he sent me another nice email afterwards. Thank you for the hospitality. You really crammed a lot of railroad into a small space. It's very different from anything else I've done. I'd love to come back. Maybe I'd love for you to come out and experience my Susquehanna. And I said, cool. So the first true scale railroad operating session that Jack and I both went to was with Rich Wisniewski on Jerry Diedzick's NYS&W, New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad.
Okay.
And that was, I'd have to look at the dates on the email, but I would think that was probably 2014, 2015.
Okay.
So and it's funny because that doesn't sound long ago. It's just a couple of years back.
It's not.
And it has been an unbelievably exceptional ride getting to know Jerry and then the whole greater New Jersey community. There's 30 or 40 guys in central and northern New Jersey that routinely operate on each other's railroads. There's probably about, I would say 8 to 10 layouts that are operational at this point, with a couple more that are going to come online soon. And different guys invite different people, but the operating sessions are out there. So the credibility that Jack and Rich have helped create on the Onondaga Cutoff, the timing was just, it was a confluence. It was this unbelievable crossroads of getting to know the right people at the right time, just when my railroad was getting mature enough to roll. But I mean, we didn't have any paperwork for the first couple operating sessions. We didn't have any of that. We wanted to run trains. And this is all the stuff that Rich is a paper hound. Al Tillotson, who's a brilliant photographer, and whose name he's got dozens of bylines in books and magazines with railroad photographs. He's fantastic, but he's another data hound. He worked in data at NJ Transit, so it's the narrowest of margins of getting the job on transit, like we've talked about, has led me to transit, which is where I was riding the train to become the creepy train guy, where I met Rich Wisniewski, who introduced me to Al Tillotson, and who introduced me to Jerry Diedzik, Tony Custer, Ted Pamprin, and the whole rest of this crowd in northern New Jersey. I mean, what an unbelievable stroke of luck.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievable stroke of luck. It's I can't believe that it happened the way that it did. If you look at it, the odds of it are almost nil.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, you guys were all hooked together at New Jersey Transit, so and you made a point of reaching out and trying to find people to talk to. So yeah, it's partly a stroke of luck and partly, some elbow grease and putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and the risk of putting yourself out there, that's there's certainly something to be said for that. But I'm fortunate that, this crazy exuberance that you hear is it doesn't ever change. It's very consistent. So at work, even though I was hiding my hobby, I was still excited to learn. I was still excited to talk to people. And when you walk into an office building, and as a 22-year-old kid out of college, getting a job at NJ Transit, looking up at this building, and there's the symbol. Like my whole life, you dream about working for a railroad, and here you are. You get the chance to do it, and it's just a thrill. What an absolute exciting opportunity to be able to work on something that you believe in so dearly. Yeah. So I feel nothing but gratitude. Very, very fortunate to be able to stand here and sit here today and talk with you guys, which in and of itself is an honor. It's a lot of fun.
And so these guys obviously took you under their wing pretty quick, and it sounds like it was a pretty rapid growth from just, Rich and Jack, and you guys started out, and now you've got probably a pretty steady crew, do you?
Yeah, and I basically, I'll send an invite out. We actually have an operating session in a couple of days. We'll have one on Friday night. Usually I do Saturday nights, but just with the holidays, it's a crazy time, so we're going to squeeze it in on Friday. But I'll send out an email to about 60 guys, some of which are far away, and I know they're not going to be present, but I just like to keep them on the list.
Right.
And then we operate with we can do it with as few as about 10. And the max you can really fit down here with the railroad is probably about 17. It gets to be pretty tight pretty quickly. So you're trying to hit a sweet spot of about 15, 16 guys, and we're able to do that pretty consistently.
Wow. Okay. And then I'm assuming from that you've gotten to operate on a lot of other railroads in the area. And when you add, we talked to the Kelly questions last time about the most influential model railroader, and I lost significant points because I asked, well, can you clarify that? Because for me, model railroading is there's several different major categories, and they're all perfectly legitimate. So my most influential model person that scratch built and that got me into looking for more to see model railroader, that's your David Bontrager or Rand Hood for the Rio Grande stuff. But Jerry Diedzik, just in a couple of years, has become a hugely influential person for me in the operations. He's operated all over the country at all of the top end layouts. And thankfully I've been able to go under his wing. And so just a couple of years back, I got out to La Mesa, to the La Mesa Model Railroad Club out there in San Diego. We've been to the Denver area. I traveled with him down to Washington, D.C. We just did that a few weeks back to some of the layouts down there. Matt Thompson's Oregon Coast. Doug Fitzpatrick's unbelievable Virginia and Western with his night sessions. And then guys like Rich Steinman and Jeff Mutter that have Erie Lackawanna layouts, which is a hoot because that's our home turf up here in New Jersey. So it's just an unbelievable community of guys. And each of these model railroads has a completely different operating style, totally different feel, but they're each interesting and worth the time and effort you put into getting there to do it. It's just a hoot. Yeah, this traveling group, I think it sounds like you're talking about ProRail. Is that what you're?
Well, and it's interesting. ProRail is sort of Jerry's a big participant with ProRail, and I was able thanks to Matt Thompson, I was able to attend the Pro Rail for my first ever Pro Rail when it was down in Washington D.C. in 2018.
Right.
But Pro Rail sort of that's a national thing, as you guys I'm sure know. And I was only invited to go down there to DC with the contact with Matt Thompson. So a lot of the guys that are in that circuit are Pro Rail guys,
right?
But it's not a hard and fast, solid group that guarantees invites to different railroads. It's a sort of Jerry describes it as a moving target. It's just like having your own operating sessions. You never know who's going to be able to make it, who's going to have a commitment come up, who's going to be on vacation.
Right.
And so you just kind of put it out there, and if you've got 6 or 7 regulars and you get 3 or 4 new guys, hey, that's all good. It's great.
Okay, that's cool.
So it's great.
So how did you acquire these 60 people? Like, so you put out an email to 60 different people. How do you decide who gets to go?
First come, first served.
All right.
First come, first served. Yep.
And there must be a core of guys like Jack and Rich, and these guys are always.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, basically, and again, with the rest of the New Jersey guys, there's usually pretty quickly 12 or 13 that'll take the plunge. One of the interesting things too is that, as I've traveled around and operated different places, in a place, David Olson is a guy who's part of the network of guys with Tony Custer, Perry Squire, Ted Pampern up north. David Olson is modeling the former CNO under CSX ownership in 1985. And he's up in Hackettstown, New Jersey, which is only about 35 minutes from where I live. So it was neat to see his railroad because, again, here I am modeling Conrail in 94. It's what I love. It's what I grew up with. Well, Jerry's modeling what he grew up with, Susquehanna in 1947. Tony Custer's modeling what he grew up with, nickel plate in the 1950s. Ted Pampern is doing the CNO in World War II because it's a fascinating era, fascinating railroad. So all of these railroads are steam engines, F units, passenger trains, timetable train order operations. And here I am with a 1994 CTC signalized trunk line, main line with no cabooses. It's quite a juxtaposition between Jerry's railroad and mine. They're 10 miles apart, and they couldn't be more different as far as the atmosphere goes down in the basement when they're running. But as I went to these sessions, I meet other people.
Sure. Why would the atmosphere be different? Like just because of the way you're running?
Well, because of the whole prototype that we're looking for. I mean, Jerry does no fast clock. It's real time. It's timetable train order operations, so everything is hand scripted. There's no radios. It's mostly steam engines with a couple diesels thrown in. And Susquehanna had, I think, 6 or 8 scheduled trains total in 24 hours.
Right.
So it's slow paced. There's time to think things through. There's times to use a lot of waiting in timetable train order. And in timetable train order, the crew makes the decision on when it's safe to move. They check the timetable, they look at their clearance card and their orders, and they make the decision if it's safe to go. In CTC, you follow signal aspects, and it's the dispatcher or operator that's telling you it's safe to go.
Yeah. So what is your feeling of timetable and train order? Because I've been to a couple operating sessions, and I come away there thinking, well, I don't like that at all. I don't want to do paperwork.
Well, and paperwork, even on my railroad, paperwork is a large part of the operation. But we do most of the paperwork ahead of time because that's how Conrail did it. So following the prototype is key if you want to come up with a good operation. Timetable train order paperwork. The challenge it's an archaic approach to running trains. So there's very little today that prepares you for what timetable train order is like. So going out,
and to me, that's part of the fascination of it.
I totally agree.
So you're getting back into something that ran trains up until well into the early 70s and later in some cases, and before it was finally phased out.
100% right. And what's fascinating is it worked. You think of how many times, thousands, millions of tons, right? You've got 1,000-ton trains, and they were going 40, 50, 60 miles an hour in some cases, and they were doing it on timetable authority.
The problem is it doesn't really work for a model railroad because it's compressed, and so the operation is compressed down to a third of the time or a fourth of the time. But writing out the paperwork and doing the paperwork is still in real time. And to me, that's why it never really works that well, because one aspect of it is compressed and the other aspect is still in real time.
I think that's a valid point. It's actually something that Jerry, who does the operator's column for Model Railroader now, the reason he does 1-to-1 time on his railroad is exactly because of that. Because he loves, his favorite part of model railroading is the cadence of the orders and writing things out and that, replicating the atmosphere of railroading on Susquehanna in 1947, which was very much laid back.
Right.
And I think what you're saying that they ran 6 or 8 trains, that's a perfect. I think a lot of model railroaders, be it they're running timetable or CTT or some, they're trying to jam way too many trains into a given time, and that just makes everybody nervous and on edge. And whereas if you check with Jerry, where he's running normal time and not many trains, it allows you to get the feeling of it, and you're not rushing. You're not going to make mistakes and stuff like that.
Absolutely, and as I've grown into this community and learned more about operations just in the last couple of years, it's sort of occurred to me that I think Jerry's is probably, as far as a home layout, it's probably my favorite adaptation of timetable train order, because the operation fits what he's trying to do. He's got a perfect space and a perfect atmosphere for what he's trying to accomplish. And it really is exciting to be part of that.
Yeah. I never really understood why timetable and train order caught on, because to me, it's like, I don't want to model paperwork.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun. Like,
well, maybe it is for you. Maybe it is for you.
For some it is, for some it's not. Like, I think some of the, best sessions, running on Jack Lasanich's, Atlantic Great Eastern or the Operation Roadshow guys, be it at their home in the Detroit area or at some of the conventions where they were teaching timetable and train order, they have a layout that's reasonably sized and not totally overloaded with everything. They've picked a reasonable schedule, and you got a few scheduled trains you have to look out for. And then you've got your extras, and that's where the fun becomes, when you're the extra trying to figure out where you can go.
Well, and it's that problem solving that these guys love. They love that the crew has the responsibility to understand the paperwork and make the decisions on when they can move. And it's Lionel. It's funny because again, I've never been a huge paperwork guy, and I'm lucky because Rich Wisniewski is a huge paperwork guy. He loves doing the paperwork, and Jack loves putting together the locomotive plan, the power desk plan for the OC. So if there are other people out there that will happily jump in and take care of the stuff that adds to your operation that you don't want to or need to do yourself. And by delegating that authority, you let them buy in, and you're creating the camaraderie that was so important to me in marching band. And that's coming back to that term. That's the camaraderie of an operating session on the Onondaga Cutoff is one of my most. It's one of the things I'm most excited about with my participation in the hobby. It's to the point now where a couple of the guys we've met at these operating sessions around the state, a fellow named Doug Watts, in particular, also another guy named Jim Dalberg. Both of these guys are what they call themselves ex-cons, because they used to work for Conrail.
Right. And
both of them are OC regulars. They're here at almost every session. And Doug Watts in particular was a train master in North Bergen. And he talks often. I have him give the job briefing sometimes, the safety briefing, so people know where the emergency exits are and stuff. We talk about radio protocol so that it sounds like Conrail on the radio. I use FRS radio sets for the operating sessions. And having him buy in, and he says, look, Dave, man, he's like, you've captured how scary it is to run trains at night. He's like, I've worked nights. I've been there. And when you run trains on the OC and that sun goes down, you think to yourself, crikey, here it comes. And sure enough, those lights go off, and it's dark in this basement. It's train lights, some building lights, a couple of yard lights, and then some safety lights down where your feet are so you're not going to trip. But you're running trains in the dark. And it changes the feel of the railroad. It really does.
I'm sure it would be. I think it'd be really cool. Okay, well, let me ask you this question, because one of my, probably a personality flaw if we got right down to it. Maybe I'm some kind of a control freak. But I never wanted any of my layout to be something that somebody else knew how to do, or I relied on somebody else to do. And it sounds like you rely on Jack and Rich to do a big part of your railroading. And I'm thinking to myself, what happens if one of those guys, they somehow they lose interest or whatever? Like that was always my thing. Like, if I can't figure it out, I don't want it part of my railroad.
Well, and there's a couple levels to that. First of all, I agree with you. There is a tremendous leap of faith and a tolerance of the fear of losing a prime contributor. There's a lot of railroads you've seen where somebody passes away and that's not the owner, and suddenly the railroad doesn't really operate well anymore because that person was indispensable. And part of my personality has always been to group people together. And it's funny. Talk about personality flaws. It's probably one of mine is that I have a real urgency. Not to get too deep, but I'm 42 years old. My mom was 42 years old when she was diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
And years of reflection, some therapy, some great friend wisdom, meditation. Look, I definitely have a fear that I'm not going to make it long enough to be 70 or 80. I hope I do. I feel great, thanks to everything. But the shadow side of losing someone important when you're young, it sticks with you.
Sure.
And so I've got an urgency to get this railroad to the point where I think it puts its best foot forward. And so I trust people with scenery that help me out. A guy named Jason Warmeck, another transit employee, another model railroad guy. I saw him reading Model Railroader on the train on the way home. And at one point I said, "Hey, you should come to an operating session if you like trains." He's like, "I didn't know you like trains." I said, "Yeah." So we got talking. He came to a couple sessions and he's like, "Well, I like building scenery. And I would love to help you out if you need help." I said, "Oh my God. Yeah, send me some pictures." He sends me these pictures. Guys, his work is museum quality.
Sure.
My scenery is good, but it's not museum quality. And I said, "Jace, can I pay it?" No. Like, I just want it to be seen by people. I don't like operating sessions. So if I build it, and I put it on your railroad, people will see it. I said, "Hey, that sounds great. Let's go." So the highway scene, the interstate highway scene on the OC is Jason's.
Right.
All I did was blend it into the scenery around it. The dairy farm scene, it's Jason's. I helped him out. I gave him some vision for it. I told him what kind of the color, the scenery, the season, and the materials and the era, and I did some of the details, but he did 95% of it, and it's better than I could have ever have done. So, by letting experts be experts, it does require some surrender, but there's a vision. It's almost like being a decent manager on the railroad. It's going to be tomorrow. I have a big staff meeting for NJ Transit that I'm holding for my whole group. So I'm going to be speaking to all 14 of my managers tomorrow for a couple hours about what we do in the stations department and setting a vision for the next year as we try and get through the remainder of the railroad trying to install this positive train control, which is draining a lot of resources right now.
Right.
So, one of the leadership seminars I went to was interesting. It said, there's three workers, right? The first guy says, "Oh, I'm laying bricks today. I lay bricks. That's what I do for a living. I hear him every day. I lay bricks." You talk to the next guy, and the next guy says, "Well, yeah, I lay bricks, but I'm building a wall today. No, these bricks are going to be part of a big wall, and I'm happy to be part of it."
Sure.
But then you talk to the third person, and that person says, "I am part of the crew that's building a cathedral today."
Mm-hmm.
And that resonated with me. I said, stations cleaning is not particularly glorious work. Roofing or HVAC might be technical, but it's not glorious. It's not something that people take pictures of and put it in the magazines. But those services, when done as part of an operation that moves 250,000 people to New York City every day, well, those become pretty important toilets to clean. They become pretty important HVAC to make sure it's working. And a good manager can instill that kind of passion in people. It's an art form, and it's something I'm still learning a lot about. But that's my approach with the OC. If I let these guys buy in and take ownership of part of these operating sessions or part of the scenery, well, yeah, I'm dependent on them, but they're going to want to keep contributing because it's theirs as much as it's mine. And so the real railroad was never one person's dream. It was always any major railroad is a group of thousands of people that are trying to work for a common goal. So the atmosphere of Conrail was one of camaraderie. It was one of brotherhood. It was one of bringing people together when everybody thought your railroad was going to fail. Everybody thought your railroad stank because it replaced their Lehigh Valley or their PRR or their New York Central. But Conrail guys had it, and girls, these people came together. They had some pride, some vision. They had great leadership, and they created something. They really rose from the ashes. They created something from very little. And that's the atmosphere that I go for. That's what's exciting to me about an operating session on the Onondaga Cutoff. It's very exciting. And this is one of the things I love talking to Jason Schron from Rapido Trains, because he's another guy that has this just passionate excitement for what he's doing. And I feel a kindred soul with him. That's one of the reasons I loved your interview with him. I thought you really captured that well.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's fun talking to you too. I mean, it's a funny thing. I mean, this is a great philosophical discussion, which we'll have to stop soon. But I mean, the honest truth is, a lot of people, model railroad operators that would say, I don't know, be in these higher end operating sessions, think that I have like zero interest, because I don't have that same kind of, man, that same, like you say with Jason, like outwardly, it appears that I'm half dead. And,
I think that's a little bit harsh.
Well, to a lot of guys that are really, really passionate about it, I'm passionate. I like to do it at a speed that I can understand it.
Well, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that. Look, it's not, we're all cut from different cloth, even though we love this hobby. And I would argue that what you did with your, with your railroad, the one that I grew up seeing in a model railroad, the Lackawanna Allegheny Southern.
Sure.
You captured a local railroad feel, but with, there was a compelling, it was very consistent. Like, it was a plausible railroad. And the way you talked about it, the way you wrote about it, for me was very inspiring, because you didn't look at, which hose was hung where on the engine. It didn't matter to you if there was an F on the frame or not necessarily. You were going to run trains and have fun, and you wanted it to be plausible. And, some of these operator guys, they're hilarious. They'll have a very serious timetable train or operating session on something that has looked like plywood for 20 years. No scenery at all. No scenery at all. None.
Yeah.
They have a couple Bakelite phones, that talk to a dispatcher, and they have a blast. That is just their part of the hobby. They might as well have 3-rail trains, or have my son's little, wooden Brio train set. You can have an operating session on that if you wanted to, with timetable train order. It's about moving trains, and that's it. Doesn't matter what the trains are.
Oh, yeah, so I guess what I would try to say is actually, again, I'm loving this conversation, and I'm desperately trying to think that, oh my God, there's going to be a part 3. Because there's a whole bunch of stuff we still haven't covered. And I think what it is for a lot of these operating sessions, it turns out to be a contest of who knows the most about it. And it always threw me, because I never liked the term, hey, we're just playing with trains, because it's more than playing with trains. It's a hobby that we enjoy, and and we like operations. And I developed my own operating system, track warrant system, that was basically, if you had to have, there was a warrant for every piece of track, and if you wanted to move forward, that track had to be empty, and you would go get the warrant. And once you were the holder of that warrant, you controlled the main line. Bruce and I came up with a great name for it, but it was so many years ago now. I can't remember.
Like Easy Warrants or something like that.
It was a better name than that.
But the system worked great. Once we got it understanding and figured out, it worked great. You only had to pick a track between 2 points and have the end points, and away you go.
Yeah, that's sort of like that's almost like a track warrant system or a manual block system.
Manual. Yeah, it was a manual track warrant system. Yeah,
I think, guys, that's great. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is to have fun. If you're having fun at your railroad, you're a successful layout owner. And that's so. I would love if you guys came to an operating session on the OC. Maybe we could do something in conjunction with Springfield or something next year. But keep it in mind, and if the opportunity opens up, that you can get down here, because
the problem is. The problem is, Dave, I'm not even on the mailing list.
Well, that'll change now. Because I can put them all. There's like, oh no, I guess I have your address. And Bruce, if you'd like to be on the list, you're welcome too. As far as I'm concerned, it's about coming together, having some beers, drinking some beers, and running the railroad. It's camaraderie. It's fun, and if the moment it's not fun, we shouldn't be doing it. But a little bit of the paperwork, a little bit of the intensity, I think adds to the fun. Because the Chicago line was not a quiet railroad.
Okay, this is going to sound really creepy, and I apologize in advance to every single person that's listening. But you sound to me to be almost like the ultimate model railroader. Like, I don't feel like if I came to your house and I didn't particularly understand it, but I had proper etiquette, and I was putting in some effort, you sound to me like you really wouldn't care how much I knew or how good I was. Another fella that I get that feeling from is our very own Mr. Chris Fitness. It's Chris Adams, who lives in Old Saybrook. He loves paperwork. And I feel I could go into his house and never feel pressured about how good I was at it, which I think is the key. I think it's cool to be around people that enjoy something, and they don't want to try to impress upon other people how much they know. Like, that's what's wrong with a lot of podcasts. It's not really about what the other people have to tell you. It's about how much I know. And you just
that gets old in a hurry, is talking about, and it's weird. Like, again, I've talked too quickly my whole life. My dad used to say, David, stop talking. You talk too damn much. You gotta slow down. So I almost feel weird talking as much as I have on this podcast, but it's your theme is consistent. You guys listen to others. And one of the things I've found in life, the more you listen, the more you learn. And there's so many smart people to learn from. So, embracing that, especially in the leadership ranks, the quote unquote managers of the Onondaga Cutoff, Jack, Rich, but also Jim Dalberg, Doug Watts, these guys I talked about, they were ex-con guys. These guys brought their paperwork from when they were on the railroad.
Sure.
I've got Doug Watts gave me these beautiful, unbelievable, beautiful wall hangings that are from Conrail headquarters, actual Conrail documents, the vision statement from Conrail in 1994, the guiding principles, and they proudly hang in my layout space. I mean, for him to donate items that he has that are important to him from a company that he believed in and worked for a lot of years to my little model railroad it's an honor. I mean, I feel so thankful, so fortunate. But that's so much of it is just appreciating people. Look, the railroad, there's a lot of idiots that work for the real railroad too. Like, it's across the board.
Let me put it to you another way. You're a lot of fun to talk to. Like, you're a lot of fun to talk to, because I can listen. I can stop you. I can ask questions. You take the time to explain. So the reason your railroad is so successful is because of you and your personality and your approach to humankind. I think maybe that's what I'm trying to say. And it's like, don't ever kid yourself. The reason your railroad and it works so well is because of you and your personality. Because you're a lot of fun to talk to. I feel It's like I could probably do 5 shows with you and none of them would be boring because and I would agree, Jason Schron has that same delivery, but I think even if and I know Jason wouldn't be, it wouldn't bother. I think you go one beyond that. I think that you're one of those people that is what more matters most to you is everybody else.
Oh, it's people, man. People make the world go around. Like, it's the most important part of everything we do is other people. And that's how I was raised. My dad, again, Peace Corps volunteer, my mom, Peace Corps volunteer. I was raised with the service mindset. But, again, I feel and your praise it means the world to me. Thank you. But how lucky to be around this many great people too. It's the fortune, that my dad, who wasn't a railroad guy, allowed me to go to the train tracks, allowed me to spend my money on model trains. I had my little 4x8 sheet of plywood growing up in high school in the spare bedroom, where I had some Rio Grande engines and some Conrail engines. But as I would go out and see Conrail, so I bought some more Conrail, and so Conrail grew on me as time went on. My dad didn't have to do that. He could have been more dictatorial and said, nope, you're going to mow the lawn and I'm not going to pay you for it. Or, nope, you need to do more public service and we're going to go out and do this. So instead of just being in Boy Scouting, we're also going to do coaching.
For sure. But that's the problem. That's another whole discussion altogether, because there's a whole bunch of people whose dads weren't that way. And unfortunately, as time goes on and they don't understand things as easily because they didn't get a push at the start, a lot of those people get thrown under the bus because nobody takes the time to find out why they fall behind.
Wow. It's being a human is a complicated thing these days. There's a lot of layers. This country's got all sorts of major problems, and a lot of people are worried. A lot of people are upset. People are scared. And I understand that stuff. I mean, you don't have to look at Facebook too long to figure out that there's a lot of stuff that's scary out there. But I really feel it's important to, if it's about people, Facebook isn't the end all. The end all is the people on the other side of Facebook. So it's still about people. And if you reach out to people one-on-one and you talk to people and you know people, now everybody can take a deep breath and have a beer together and run some trains or go to a hockey game or a baseball game or whatever floats, run a marathon like my brother did. Do whatever you need to do to find community. But when you find it, it's such a centering and wonderful thing. And that's where your push with social media, it couldn't be more on point. It is just because it is a unifying factor. Everybody has access to information now. And so there's the wackos have gone nuts. They love it because they can be wacko with their wacko friends. Some of that stuff's dark. But a good chunk of it, more than is dark, is really bright. And it's an opportunity that we've never had as human beings to connect across interests with such ease. It's remarkable.
Bruce, I'm getting scared.
No, this is fascinating.
Yeah, well, the problem is this might actually turn into our first ever 37-part trilogy. An actual 37.
There's a bunch of questions I want to ask, and we're out of time again.
We're out of time, but we will start up again, and we'll do a little half-hour thing where you can ask your questions, and it'll become part of something else.
Yep.
Because I got stuff I want to say too, but Dave won't let us talk.
See, that's my dad's been telling me that my whole life.
Well,
David,
don't
keep
stop.
your mouth shut.
Don't stop.
No.
It's perfect for this. All right, Bruce, can you give out our email address?
Our email address, because you're going to want to write in and let us know what you think about this fascinating man we're talking to. Modeler's Life, modelers with one L, modelerslife@gmail.com.
And we have a website, modelerslife.com. If you go there, you'll see a whole bunch of cover photos for our most recent issues. And this is on the free channel. And if you're listening to us on the free channel, if you go to our website and click on the Patreon button about a third of the way down on the front page, you'll see that there's a whole bunch more podcasts that come out on Tuesdays. And for $5 a month, that's $1.25 per podcast, I guess. You'll get to listen to twice as much every month, which keeps us going and makes us interested to keep going. And someday when we get 1,000 patrons, we'll hire staff and it'll get even better. I think we've covered it, have we not, Bruce?
I think so.
All right. Dave, do you remember what it is you're supposed to say at the end?
I do.
All right.
I think. And I just like to wish everybody happy rails to you.
Well, it's not yet, Dave.
Oh. Well. See, I do learn slow.
It's okay. This can be edited out.
Thank God. Thank God for modern digital technology.
Yes. Dave ending take 4.
Yeah, that won't be edited out. Trust me. I try to do as little work as possible. All right. Well, Dave, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
happy rails to you.
And now it's time for the New Jersey Transit Elevator Escalator Report. Take it away, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. Today, number 1 here on the list is Newark Penn Station number 14. That one needs a step chain adjustment. They got to adjust the lower carriage assembly. Newark Penn Station number 8 is back in service. Secaucus 16 was out overnight for a skirt panel reset, but he's back in service too. Somerville eastbound is still out for its DCA test. We had a sump pump problem, so they should be back on that later this week. And Absecon, the lone elevator there, was out overnight. Somebody held the doors open too long, and it's back in service as of this morning.
It's another Lincoln Homer.